welcome back to your #1 source for cozy gaming and design content. I'm Nick, and today we're going to be taking a look at this guy. No, not the arcade stick again. If you're interested in that, go check out my video here. No. In today's video, we're going to be taking a look at my homespun version of the Odin Mod for the arcade stick. So, some of you may be wondering what exactly the Odin Mod is. The short answer is that it's a mod that you can install for your 8-bit-do arcade stick, meant to give you mechanical switches instead of a ball-top joystick. The premise is that this helps in platformer games like Mario for precision and accuracy with your inputs, because everything is a distinct and tactile click instead of a rather vague input of a joystick. For a lot of people who really love playing platformers with their arcade stick, this is a great option because not only does it have the functional advantages, it also, in my humble opinion, adds a huge quality of life upgrade to the arcade stick in the form of mechanical switches. If you're already familiar with the Odin mod, you may be thinking, wait, that doesn't look like the Odin. And you would be right. This right here is my own personal version that I made myself. Why, you may be asking? The answer is quite simple. I couldn't buy the Odin. So my main issue, and the whole reason I went through the trouble of making my own, is because the Odin mod is only available in rather small batches, and it's often out of stock on Etsy. I don't blame the people making it at all. It's apparently made by hand, and from what I can see, it's a pretty high quality print, and the electronics involved probably aren't particularly trivial to put together. So I certainly don't blame them for not keeping it in stock constantly. That's just kind of how it works with things that are made by people who actually care about their products. They aren't likely to be made in high quantities. However, that then leaves me with one big problem. How do I get it? Well, at the time I found out about this, I was still deep in the weeds of design school, so I was getting pretty familiar with CAD software. So I fired up SolidWorks and modeled this up, printed it out, added a bit of Bondo, and painted it to kind of match the Nintendo red of the arcade stick. One thing you might immediately notice is the fact that it's not nearly as low profile as the Odin is. And you would be right. I decided to use standard height cherry switches because, frankly, I didn't have any low profile ones on hand I could use, and I liked the way that these felt. One super important factor in this is the fact that mine is hardwired. Now, if I were to be making this now, and I may make a V2, but if I were to make it now, I would definitely have designed up and had printed a PCB so that I could make it hot swap instead of having to solder directly to the switch contacts. Regardless, once you actually get everything in and set, it works great. But the process is pretty fiddly, and I wouldn't necessarily suggest doing that if you want a quick and simple solution. This is more of a weekend project type of a deal. So it may have crossed your mind at this point that this is kind of a lot of work just to add some clicky switches to an already clicky and frankly great feeling arcade stick. And, dear viewer, you would be right. The arcade stick doesn't need any of this to be a great product. However, that's not really the point of modding, at least not how I see it. See, I don't usually end up doing mods or customizing my gear for fully functional reasons. Usually, I just think it's super cool that I can do it. Now, admittedly, this has led to 1 or 2 broken devices over the years, but ultimately, I think that what tinkering and messing around with your products is all about is just having a good time and learning about this thing that you have. Learning all its ins and outs and figuring out ways to make it better and make it suit you better. And I think from a design standpoint, that's especially true. I think within the design world, there's a tendency to look back at what other people have done as gospel, maybe a bit too much. Now, that's certainly not to say that learning from others and looking to history is a bad thing. Just that I think product design, for rather obvious reasons, tends to follow economically viable design trends more than it does seek out new and interesting and intrinsically valuable ones. I don't know, maybe I'm getting too philosophical about a D-pad replacement for the arcade stick, but I think there's a lot of value to be had from taking apart and examining a product from all angles and making improvements where possible. And I think it's incredible that with the rise of rapid prototyping tech like 3D printers, that's more possible for more people than it ever was when I was growing up. But back to this guy. Why did I feel the need to have it? Well, for the obvious reasons I've already stated, but also because I don't really play fighting games. I've never really been interested in the genre outside of a fun little romp during a game night with friends, and I don't own an arcade cabinet yet that I can use to take full nostalgic advantage of the beautiful design of the arcade stick. So for me, this really just made more sense, as I'm a much bigger fan of 2D side-scroller platforming games like Mario, Celeste, Hollow Knight, and the numerous other amazing games on all the various platforms. And, as I've touched on in a few previous videos, platformers specifically benefit a huge amount from these kinds of tactile and immediate feedback modes. When your inputs feel mushy and indistinct, it can be very hard to tell if what you think you're telling your character to do is actually what's going to happen. And no, I don't need any competitive advantage, and I'm certainly not good enough to be attempting to get frame-perfect timings on any of my inputs. However, I do really appreciate the feel of pressing a key and knowing that, barring some mechanical fault, my input has certainly gone through. Plus, it just feels amazing. I can't, and probably don't need to, tell you how satisfying it is to hear and feel mechanical feedback. I genuinely don't think that this is just nostalgia or rose-colored glasses. I think the physical and mechanical buttons and switches of yesteryear are and were far superior to almost any input method we use today, with most UX and UI focusing on software switches and buttons. And I understand that with the amount of possible inputs and functions that we have available to us on our phones in such a small space, it doesn't really make much sense to be having a switch or a knob for everything. But I do think that where they are used and where they are needed, we should seek out and appreciate the really great feeling ones. On top of that, I am very much still in my mechanical switches are perfect and should be put in everything phase, and until that's over, if ever, I just want all of my inputs to feel as amazing as they can, at least where possible. But I'm not just making this video to hype up the Odin Mod or wax poetical about my version. I also want to let you all know that I'm going to make these files available to download and print for free. I'll put the link in the description, and if you do decide to do this mod, please share pictures. I would love to see where you take this. But now I'll do a bit of a tutorial section here at the end, because, like I said, this is a rather fiddly mod, so please do feel free to mod and improve my design. I know it's definitely not perfect, and there's a lot of room for improvement. You're going to start by either printing the files yourself or sending them off to be printed by any 3D printing service that works for you. After you get the finished part, sand and finish however you want. I personally recommend a rather rough sand and then a few layers of Bondo body filler. I find that this gives it a really nice, uniform look and feel, so it's kind of up to you. You could just leave it stock, print with a red filament, and maybe give it a light sanding and you'll be fine. But after that, you're gonna need your switches and some wires. I suggest you get 2 colors just so you know which is the ground and which is the data. I think that's what it's called. Now, technically it doesn't matter because you're just bridging the contact, but it makes it easier to understand when we're soldering later. So this is the most tedious part of the whole thing. Soldering every wire to the pins of your switches. I did yellow for data and green for ground. This just makes it easier to tell what you're doing when we actually attach it to the arcade stick. Once you have all your wires soldered up, you're going to want to take all the switches and put them into the sockets of your 3D printed part, poking all the wires down through the central post. You may want to mark each data wire so you know which direction it should be assigned to in the next step. You can put the main part aside for a bit at this point because we're going to be prepping the arcade stick itself now. So first you're going to want to grab a screwdriver and take out all 6 of the screws and take the back off the arcade stick. It should just come off rather easily. There shouldn't be any clips or anything really holding the 2 parts together. Once inside, you'll see this guy. This is the stick itself. First thing we want to do is take the ball off so we can remove the whole unit. This is done by holding the ball and using a flathead screwdriver or a coin or something to unscrew the main shaft from the ball. This screw is captive, so don't worry about losing it. After you get the ball off, we can move to the stick itself. All you need to do is unplug the connector, unscrew these screws, and it'll come right out. So now we have this hole here, and this is where we're going to install our modded piece. It's pretty simple. You just poke it up through and screw down the nut we printed alongside the main body. After we have it nice and secured, we can get to the final step, soldering. For this part, you're going to want to bring your attention to this section of the board. You'll see these pads here, which we're going to be soldering directly to the corresponding switch. This is why labeling them earlier was helpful. After you've got them all soldered, just maybe do a quick test before closing it up. I found this method of soldering directly to the switch pins isn't exactly the most robust to torsion, so we want to make sure nothing came loose and that we're all wired up correctly. Assuming we did, we can now close it up and enjoy our new, incredibly satisfying little creation. Wow! If you made it this far in the video, I'm very impressed. I hope you had a good time, and again, please, if you do end up doing this mod, share the results with me. My Instagram is linked in the description of all of my videos. I would love to see where you all take and improve on this rather simple and straightforward design. But other than that, thank you so much for watching, I hope you have a great day, and happy gaming!